Welcome back to another UNC Tar Heels basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you are watching us on our YouTube channel, that is called Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our director of basketball recruiting and analyst, longtime AAU college and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk. And a very quick reminder, if you want access to everything David does aside from the occasional podcast, you must be a premium subscriber. It's just $8.33 a month. You also get Dina's recruiting insights and wisdom and all the stuff that the whole staff brings to the board. We put a ton of stuff on our site that is not free. It's premium content. We need to charge because we got to pay the bills in order for us to do what we do. So it's just $8.33 a month, and you can be a Carolina Tar Heel insider too. So David, I don't think a lot of people are searching for answers about this basketball team in the sense that they sort of know what they are, but they're trying to rationalize how the basketball team has gotten to this point. They're 19-12, finishing the regular season, 11-9 in the ACC, lost 3 of their last 4 at home, I believe. 3 of the last 4 at home. This is a struggling basketball team that, in my view, even though they had some upticks, and I do think they got rid of the weight on their shoulders here about 2 weeks ago, I don't think that this team has improved. In my column I wrote after the Duke game, at the end, I threw in November 7th, which was when they opened against UNC Wilmington. I think it's kind of the same team it was then, which is highly disturbing because most teams are a lot better than they were in early November. So I'm very curious, and you and I have not talked about this. I teased it on the podcast with Jacob after the game. You and I are going to have a very raw, organic conversation here about it. I'm very curious what your thoughts are, where you see this team right now in a snapshot juxtaposed to November 7th when they opened the season.
We haven't spoken. In fact, it's been so long since we've been face-to-face, I didn't have a beard last time we were on, so it kind of caught you off guard.
I know. I told you, you got something on your face there, man. You got to wipe it off, and there it is.
But so it's been a while. We haven't discussed. We've texted, tweeted. We haven't really sat down and discussed this at all. I'll be honest with you, in just keeping up with what you've written, watching your podcast that you've done, after the game, individual podcast. You honestly been a lot more, I think, positive about this team than what I've been. It's been a long time since I felt good about this team. And even when you look at the runs, couple of wins that they had late in the season, I don't think Florida State and Notre Dame beat a good high school team. So I didn't get excited about that. Notre Dame game was hard to watch. I told you before we came on here, we were discussing it. Even the second half, it was close, and you just have to play poorly for Notre Dame to be in the game. And the same way with Florida State. So I just think you had to look at the competition level, and you kind of look at what North Carolina does and who they are. They don't obviously don't shoot the ball well at all. The worst shooting team in the ACC from field goal percentage, especially from 3-point. And one of the worst teams in the country at that. They don't shoot it well. Also I think, they've got just guys on the floor that you don't have to guard. And that's evident. It's been evident in games. And then you can help off on Baycott, and that's where they want the ball to get to. So then it becomes difficult to do that. Defensively, they're okay. They're fair. But, you take a team like UCLA who doesn't score a lot of points, but, man, they're in a defensive stance when they get off the bus. And so North Carolina's not that. So they can't count on their defense to win games. So, you just got a lot of things going on. And besides that, when I watch them, I don't think at any time this year have I really watched North Carolina play where I'm like, man, this thing's getting a little chippy. Or there might be a fight here. Somebody's going to get tacked up. Or there's none of that. I know North Carolina State at home did. I think that just kind of went south because you had a foul that was not a dirty play or anything, and the North Carolina
Yeah.
State got hurt. And there was no intention there for that. I don't even know that it was really that hard a foul. He was just in an awkward position in the air, and his feet went out from under.
Yeah.
But I don't see any. I just don't see that. And I don't see the fire, and I don't see the firepower. So that's not obviously not a good combination.
It's interesting because the Notre Dame game was an abhorrent display of basketball, especially in the first half. It was the worst statistical offensive half since 1979. I guess you have to go back to the 7-0 game against Duke when Dean held the ball. Carolina only attempted 2 shots in the half, so that era is over. Stall ball. It was really bad. I mean, everything about it was horrible. You go to Florida State, then the reason I had some positive things to say about Florida State, I recognize that they made a ton of threes, which camouflaged the fact that they made 2 twos in the first half, but they were shooting more threes. But it's the way they get them. And that's what I've been trying to tell people the last month or so. It's they hit shots against Virginia, but they moved. They moved without the ball, and they moved the ball quickly. They didn't pound on the floor as much, and as a result, they got more rhythm type shots on the perimeter. I thought that was the case against FSU because they were aware of the kick out, the drive and kick out. They were aware of the swing, so they got some of those shots. Now against Duke Saturday night, they went back to the dribbling. This offense is so easy for teams to defend. Everybody kind of knows what opponents are going to do, but it's a lot different to just know it and then to actually stop it. And one of the things that's been happening so much lately with this Carolina team is that when the first option gets snuffed out, they have a terrible time getting to the second option. So then they get into a breakdown mode, and I wouldn't call it freelance because I don't see the elements of emotion freelance from them that we saw under Roy, for example. And that's when they become a dribble, fire up a shot team. This team takes more shots with the shot clock winding down than even the 2019 team that went 14-19 did. This club has an awful time getting guys open, and they don't move, and they just get very stagnant. And the other side of that too, David, is, they're so hell-bent on getting Armando the ball, which they need to, but the doubles are there. I've seen not everybody doubles the same way. Duke was waiting for Armando to start his move before they made the double. And Armando's moves have been kind of slow. It's almost like he was waiting for the double, so he was slow. If he were catch, turn, and be able to hit a 12-footer, just like that, and keep the ball up high, I think that would change. The double might come quicker. He gets rid of it, and they could maybe get better ball movement and get more looks. Notre Dame would bring the double right away. Multiple times when let's say RJ is the point guard, and he's going to swing to the left to Leaky or Caleb on the wing. Before the ball gets to the wing, Dane Goodwin's coming over to double. So everybody's doing it a little bit differently, but they're doing it to get the same effect. The same effect is take them out of the set, make them pound it on the ground, and put up bad shots. And that's pretty much what they've done outside of Clemson, Virginia, and even Florida State. I do think there was some fluidity with Florida State, but in the second half, they were pretty bad offensively in that game too.
As far as the offense goes, you're talking about getting from the first option. If that doesn't work past that, that was the thing that always really just with Roy Williams, I was always amazed how quick. You never heard him out there calling plays. So they would run something, and they could go from their secondary to the set, and they didn't have to stop, set it up, or call a play. It was seamless. They could run their secondary and they could go to that. And then if the play didn't work, they could go from that to the next options, a motion or whatever it might be out of that. And like I said, you couldn't tell one from another. One just flowed right into the other one. And that's probably not fair to Hubert Davis to start talking about Roy Williams, but that was one of the things that always impressed me about his teams. Now to go to this year's teams, I just think when you've got guys on the floor that the defense is not going to respect, and you're trying to get the ball inside, you've got a back to the bucket post play. That makes it extremely, extremely tough because they can double and they're not going to worry about certain guys. And look, Leaky Black's a winner. Leaky Black's made huge plays at North Carolina, and Leaky Black is You've got to have him on the floor, man. And if I'm coaching, I want a Leaky Black on my team. So I know why he's not going to Leaky Black. But we know Leaky Black from the outside is going to be a little bit offensively challenged. So you got to have shooters around him. When you've got other guys, Caleb Love's, not able to make outside shots. And your four, Nance, when Nance makes shots, the team looks differently. But that's been few and far between. So we all kind of hope, Pete Nance will be Brady Manick, and that's not worked out. But you can just see the difference when Brady Manick was able to spread the floor, and that ball could go right back out to him. And he was 6'10", and that ball was right here, and they couldn't get to him because he was so tall and his release was so quick and he was so accurate. And I'm using a lot of so's around what he did, but he was so good last year. But when you put all those other shooters, guys making shots around him, it becomes a lot easier. So now, they're not guarding the three. They're not really respecting Nance's shot. Caleb Love can't make outside shots. It becomes tough when the way, if you're going to have a back to the bucket post play, the way to do it is you've got to have shooters around. I go back to Iowa when they had Luka Garza. Man, they had every guy on that team from the perimeter. You saw them. They could make it from the half line. And that's what you've got to have around that. Now, I was talking to somebody about
I think when I saw them, and let me cut in real fast, I saw Carolina play there. I covered the game in Iowa City, and I think they hit 17 or 18 threes that night.
Yeah.
And it was an unbelievable team.
And
that was one of the most fun offensive teams I've ever seen.
If you double down and double off somebody, you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
So teams can double team Armando Bacot without any consequence. I had somebody I was talking to, it's about a different team, and they were saying, there was talking about some guys in a recruiting class coming in. They said, are there shooters in that recruiting class? And I said, no. And I said, he said, we're going to get stuck again. I said, no, because next year's big man is going to be able to play more out on the floor. And it's going to be more pick and roll and more pick pop, more mid post. He's not going to post up. You don't have to have those shooters then. When you're big can space the floor, now your guys can drive. Now your guys can do all those other things, all the curls, all the shot fakes and cuts to the rim, and the dribble drives and all that stuff. But if you've got a back to the bucket big, which North Carolina does, you've got to have shooters around that individual, and North Carolina doesn't have it. And it's a bad offensive mesh.
And to stay on that, if you don't have a lot of shooting around that, then you need more movement. You need to be able to create stuff. And I see Armando get doubled. And I think he does a solid job of trying to dribble out of the double team. The problem is there's no movement. So if whoever leaves their man to cut, whether it's Pete's man or Leakey's man, to come down and double Armando, they don't move. And when Armando kicks it out, they retreat back to their man. He's still there. They haven't lost him. So I think Armando's stepping out further. If you've noticed, when he dribbles out of the double teams, he's getting, he's about 15 feet away from the basket, 16, 17 feet away from the basket, gets it to a guard, and there's no movement. There's no back cutting. There's nothing there. And so they're stagnant. They're almost going into a reset, even though they're going to look for the second option, which isn't going to be there because there's been no movement. There are no screens because the guy that's setting the screen would set the screen, just got out of a double team. And that's where they just dribble, maybe a toss over to Caleb. He gets it back to RJ, 2 or 3 dribbles, and he shoots. Sometimes RJ is able to get into the lane. I just think the lack of movement, which to me shouldn't matter what your composition of your lineup is. You should be able to move and cut, pass, cut, and replace, right? And they don't do that. And it's amazing how often the guy whose man leaves to double simply doesn't move, doesn't make himself available because he's wide open. He's wide open. And it's an amazing part that is natural basketball where you learn it at a young age that you've got to move all the time. And you learn about doubles that much as a young age, but you learn it when you get older, that if your guy left you, you've got to move and get open. And they don't do that. I don't know why they don't do it very often, David. I don't know if it's because they're just sticking to whatever the script is, or if they have maybe lost some of their instincts to play in that freelance motion that they did before, because they're so determined to run the sets that Hubert calls about 92% of the time.
I thought against Virginia, when the double came, Leakey particularly did a good job because he cut to the front of the rim.
Yep.
And for a guy that's not going to make, not going to shoot the three-pointer at a high rate, that's what you've got to do. So you're usually taught, if your man doubles, that's what you do. You cut to the front of the rim or the middle of the paint.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's coming from the opposite side, from the opposite post. So if your guy's in the corner, let's say that's Pete Nance, it's either going to be Nance or Black. That guy's got to cut to the front, and then those other guards have got to move and fill in those open spaces. So I see a lot of times, like you say, there's nobody cutting into the open spots in the lane in front of the rim when that double comes. And then if that other person stands, then the other perimeters are going to stand too. And one thing I noticed in football, you call it a muddy pocket when the quarterback's always got a hand in his face. He's always under duress. He's always under pressure. And that's kind of what I see with Bacon. He's trying to throw out a muddy pocket because the perimeters on the opposite sides are not moving or out front, like you say. So they're always in the line. The defender's always in the line of sight. Well, that perimeter player that's outside. It's like a straight line pass out, and the defender's in between them. Yeah. So that's not worked out well. So it's not like if you're even if you're coaching high school and middle school and you're coaching against a zone, and that's basically when a double team comes, that's what it is. You got two guys guard the ball, and you got three other guys zoning their spaces. And you always tell your guy, hey, don't just go to a spot. Find an open spot in that zone and sit down in it. What does a wide receiver do? He goes out, he finds an open spot in the zone defense, the wide receiver. No matter where it's at, it may not be the same place every time. He finds that open spot, he crouches down, he sits. Same way with basketball, and they're not doing that. A football analogy, you imagine against its own defense, a bunch of wide receivers going out. They're not moving into open spots. They're just going to where the play's drawn up, and it may be double covered.
Yeah. You mentioned Virginia. Two or three of the players after that game told me they thought that was their best movement off the ball of the season. And maybe one of the reasons is because they're so uber aware of what UVA does, because usually UVA's handled this team pretty well, and they knew going in they have to move. They have to move a lot against Virginia, because anything that you do to give Virginia that plays into their hands, it's going to make life that much more difficult for you. But that's the game they moved the best without the ball. That's the game that they had a high assist rate, and that's the game you're talking about. I remember a couple of those times where Leaky cut went right to the rim, and I think he got fouled one time. He got a bucket another time, but they don't do that much. And what I'm seeing, I know that these are really good basketball players. I've been around these kids when they've done amazing things. I was there for that run last year where there was a lot of high IQ stuff that they were doing, and they had great instincts at times. It looks to me like the instincts have been squashed. They're not coming out. They're not percolating on offense. And we'll talk about defense later. Offensively, the instincts are not percolating like they did before. I've sort of seen a general decline in, I'm not going to say the effectiveness of the offense, but I guess maybe I should, because look at some of the point totals and look at what happens at crunch time. One of the issues that they have when they've been blowing these leads or not been able to close on teams is that teams ramp things up a little bit more and they struggle even more. I'll give you an example right here. The two Duke games this year, it was Nance hit his only bucket in the first game to tie it at 57 with 3:57 left. Duke scored the final 6 points. They win by 6. Carolina's 0 for 5 from the floor. You go back to last night. It's 55-54 after RJ's bucket with 4:20 left. Carolina's in the lead. Duke outscores the Tar Heels 8-2 the rest of the way. Carolina got 2 free throws. They're 0 for 7 from the floor. So if you combine the last 4 minutes of both games, this veteran team is 0 for 12 from the floor, with 2 missed dunks, right? Or excuse me, not 2 missed dunks, over 12 from the floor, and then the 2 free throws, outscored 14-2. That's a difference of 12 points. The total victory difference for Duke, the margin of victory difference in those 2 games is 11 points. That's the difference right there. So when they had to run stuff and they had to cut and they had to be sharp and they had to have great awareness and they had to have terrific recognition and complete plays when the other team is playing its best defense of the game, Carolina struggled mightily. They, even with the set play that they called with 43 seconds left against Duke, they snuffed it out immediately. And Carolina ended up getting a wild shot. They didn't convert. Duke got the scramble for the rebound, and 19 seconds left. Blue Devils are inbounding the ball, up 3. So that, to me, sort of synopsizes the problem of the whole season, especially the last 2 months.
And late in the game last night, we'll just go ahead and discuss what we were talking about before we came on here. So Duke just said, hey, we're going to put a guy in the paint. He's not going to guard Leaky. And the ball kept finding Leaky in the last few possessions over on the left wing. And you could tell he didn't want to shoot it. It was like, I'm open. I don't want to take this shot. And, he tried to look for something else, and something else wasn't there. One time, I think he caught it about 12 to 15 feet. But you could tell he would get it, and it was the hesitation.
Lots. He had a 3 at the top of the key like that. Like he just wanted to find someone to pass it to. He ended up shooting and hit hard off the back of the rim.
He understands. I had an old coach, and his thing was a good shot. Our offensive goal is we're going to take good shots. Well, what's a good shot? A good shot's a shot you can make. And that was his rule for it. So and Leaky understood, hey, this is not what I want to get here. This is not what's best for the team. And he was very apprehensive about it. But like you say, you don't see the other players pimping out in that situation. Now, I know this, and you can go back to high school basketball. If we have a guy that's not going to be guarded, okay, we're going to use him in ball screen. If he's not, we're either going to hand off with him. So if Leaky's got it on the wing and they're not going to guard him, he needs to go straight into the handoff to the guy to make it. It's probably going to be R.J. Davis, who gets downhill. They're automatically going to be in a drop coverage. They're going to go over that. He can get into the mid-range. He made a lot of mid-range jumbo jumpers last night, so that's there. Yeah. Or you're going to set that ball. If they're not going to guard you, you're going to do that. So, just looking down, like you say, looking down a stretch, them not being able to score. And I think another thing that you pointed to earlier, so you run your play, you don't get what you want, and now all of a sudden you're in plan B, plan C, whatever. And as you said, this team has not done a very good job of that this year.
Yeah, RJ told me after the first Duke game that the only time they really get into freelance is when the sets break down. And that's what that was the game that really alerted me to, hey, this is kind of an issue. And I asked Hubert 2 days later in the weekly ACC teleconference, when do you call plays and when do you let them go freelance? And he said, well, I always call plays after a made basket. So you never see the rip and run anymore. Carolina used to turn other teams' made baskets into their own fast breaks a lot of the time. You never see that anymore. The other thing he said is that after missed shots, he lets them go freelance. But I see a lot of called plays after missed shots. And there are times where they got a guy filling the lane, there's a called play, and it stops. And I think part of this is Hubert still learning as a head coach and learning to get better feel for the game and stuff. But I think an older team like this would be very well served if they just got a chance just to play and just roll out there and play. But if they don't work on it, and my understanding is they don't spend a great deal of time working on the freelance type stuff, then they're not going to be very good at it because they don't have chemistry with that. Their chemistry is trying to run sets. Their chemistry is not designed in the freelance, which is one reason I think they're not a very good fast break team.
And let me say this too, and a lot of people I think have played know this, but freelance in today's game, freelance is not where you go down to the car and turn around, I'll hit you with a pass.
Yeah.
Like out in the back playing football in the backyard. That's not freelance. And I think a lot of people, when they say freelance, you'll have a lot of set people, like sets and all that. They'll just make it sound like it's pickup ball.
It's more like a motion offense, basically.
Yes, but here's the thing. I've seen some of the best offenses in the country. I've seen Alabama in person this year. And man, and their whole thing, they come with a high ball screen or whatever, or a go screen, they get a switch. And that's what the NBA is. It drives me crazy in the NBA of how easily teams switch. You show a ball screen and a defense will come and you don't even attack it. You just have a guy come to look like he's going to set a screen. Then all of a sudden he'll move. And the next thing you know, you've got a center trying to guard a point guard 25 feet from the bucket.
By the way, Carolina does that a lot. Carolina does that a lot.
And it's just automatic switch. I think you do it too easily. But I'm getting away from it here. But, that's kind of like what these teams do. They set it up. They get you to switch it. If you don't switch it, then they're going to attack and draw help and then kick and shoot the ball. And that's one thing that hurts North Carolina too. It's hard to do that when you've got guys who can't shoot the ball. Because what's it made out of? We talked about the Phoenix Suns. I think the last time we were on here with Steve Nash. What did they do? Stoudemire set the ball screen. Nash came all off of it. Stoudemire went to the rim. If you didn't tag him with all the help, threw it up for the dunk. If you didn't,
Lively got an alley-oop dunk that way last night in the last few minutes of the game.
But they don't have the shooters around them to do that. And I think that's what it comes back to. When you have these teams that struggle doing that, it just makes it tough. I've watched teams this year who don't shoot the ball well. The Auburns, the Arkansas, teams like that, Tennessee, who doesn't shoot the ball well. And I'm going to tell you where they make it up at. On the defensive end, man, they will get in you and they'll make a rugby game out of it. You watch a Tennessee or an Arkansas game, it's going to go 2.5 hours. If it starts at 6, have everything done, or you're going to go to bed late because there's so many fouls. It's a rugby scrum for 40 minutes.
The Auburn-Alabama game went like 2 hours and 45 minutes last week.
So if you watch North Carolina, to me, like I said, they've guarded well, but I think they're finesse defensively. I don't see that edginess, that chippiness, any of that. So you've got a team who doesn't shoot the ball well. Well, if you don't shoot the ball well, what should you be able to do? You should be able to attack the rim. You should out-athlete people. You should just beat them down physically. And North Carolina can beat you down physically on the boards, but as far as getting out running, as far as contesting, as far as getting steals, as far as attacking the rim off a dribble, they don't do all those things that a team should do that doesn't shoot the ball well.
They don't put teams on their heels.
No.
We're going to get in defense a little bit later. I want to stay on offense here and ask you about Caleb Love. Caleb is a guy that we're now finished with the regular season of his junior year. He'll be the first one to acknowledge that it has not gone anywhere close to how he thought it would go. I have my theories on some things, and before I give them, I want to hear what your theories are now that you've seen him for a full third season at North Carolina.
I'd like to hear your theories before I said mine, but
no, we're going with you first. I have a feeling we both see the same thing. Similar
it's just hard to figure out. Well, here was the thing early in the season, and I think he has tried to do a better job of doing what the coaching staff wants him to do. Because when we were doing a lot of these podcasts earlier in the year, I told you, man, I can't handle watching it. It's just dribble, 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 dribble. It's like the Morrison commercial now with State Farm where he's doing basketball, about all the dribble, 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 and that's what it was. Bounce, bounce, bounce. That's what it was, and that's what he's doing. He's just bouncing it everywhere, and he just dribbles around the circle and then throws up a 30-footer with two guys hanging all over. It was horrible to watch, but I really felt like
fading.
It really felt like as they got through about a third of the season, he was trying to do a better job of that. And when I watched him last night, he's not out of control. He might have had one shot there late. He's not, or wasn't. I've criticized in the past. Why has Caleb Love got 5, or does, as Armando Bay call it, got 5 shot attempts, and Caleb Love shot it 20 times? That shouldn't be the way it goes. But that's not been it. I felt like he's trying to play to that. I don't know if he can just play that style of ball. But I don't know if he has to have a certain style to be comfortable with. Now, I've said this. I said his freshman year. I felt like watching his freshman year, he had to have space. And he didn't have it his freshman year because they had 4 bigs. And they had 2 bigs on the floor at all times. And he's trying to attack with each block field. And then you go back to this year. It's different. They don't have all those bigs, but Nance is basically, and that's something too. Nance is not a 4. Nance is a 5. You're playing with 2 5s on the floor at the same time. So they've not had the space this year. When has Caleb Love really been good in his career at North Carolina? And I mean the All-American good.
Second year when there was only 1 big on the floor.
When Brady Manick, too, at the end of the season, Brady Manick was on fire. And Caleb can kind of just build, and all that builds. He's got all that energy, and he's feeling it. The floor's stretched, and he's got space, and he's in a groove. But I just don't know if you get back to sets and you get back to the floor being compacted, and other guys can't shoot the ball, and there's always people in the lane, and he can't drive. You think about it now. The driving lanes are not there for the guards because it's always congested. There's always bigs in the paint. The driving lanes are not there. So what's he have to do when he creates? The crossover, step back, 22-footer of a guy hanging on him. That's what he's got to do because he can't do the other. So I just feel like he's a guy, just from my viewpoint, that has to have space and freedom in an up-tempo offense, and that's what he has to play in. He can't play in that as much in that set when the lane's clogged.
Okay, are you saying that the freedom of movement is a strength of his because he does have he's got a lot in his bag when he drives. He's got a good floater game. He's got a good pull-up game. He's got a good runner game, and he's pretty strong. He gets to the rim, and he's generally a pretty good free throw shooter. His shooting percentage is down from the line this year, and he's acknowledged that. And I think a lot of that he has said is because he's been very frustrated all year. And sometimes he carries negative sequences with him for a while, and that affects him at the free throw line. He's got a lot in his bag driving, and I believe that his driving game is his game. The 3 is more of an accompaniment. I know that history will look at him for all the 3s against UCLA in the second half, all the 3s against Duke, and of course the one over Mark Williams. But when I think of Caleb's game, I think Caleb's playing his game when he's going downhill. He's getting in the lane. He's forcing people to move, and he's creating stuff. And a lot of times he's drawing fouls. That's his game. And it just looks to me a lot of the time like that's just not there. Even when Nance is sort of playing outside, defenses lay off him a little bit more because he's not much of a threat out there. So the space that was there when Brady was there isn't there. It's cut down some. So the help side's there, and we're seeing him clock
RJ was making shots too.
RJ's better at dragging a defender in the lane and stopping and popping.
What I mean last year though, if you look at him in the tournament and in the postseason, Manick's making shots, RJ's making shots. Yeah. And now it's just gravy for Caleb Love. He's feeling
it's more highly contested now. It's more highly contested. And I just think that when I watch Caleb, it's like he wants to run at warp speed. He wants to move at warp speed, and everything that they're doing is 55.
Methodical.
Yeah, it's 55, and he's a guy that wants to go 85.
Yeah.
And that's where sometimes I think he takes the bad shots because he's trying to do things quickly. He's trying to make things happen. He's percolating so much. He's trying to get that happen, and it's not there because they don't run. They don't fast break a whole lot. They've totally gone away from trapping defensively, pressuring, which I thought they should do to get some easy buckets. They have become a methodical half-court, call the set, run the play team. And I think a guy like that needs to play with a lot more juice because he's got juice. That's part of his engine. That's part of his game. Some guys thrive in that kind of offense that they run. Some guys don't fit, and he just doesn't look like it's been a fit at all year for me. He's had some good games, but he's not had the holy crap game. He just hasn't had that. He had half dozen of those last year. there was a stat coming into this year where every time Caleb scored 20 or more, they were undefeated. Every time he handed up 5 or more assists, they were undefeated. Man, that's been obliterated. It's not even discussed anymore because it's so long gone. Because a lot of his 20-point games are 6 for 17 instead of a year ago where maybe they were 9 for 17. And I think there's a big difference. And there's a big difference in the connectivity out there. And because stuff breaks down, you're seeing him pound on the floor and take so many step back threes that he wasn't taking as many last year. He's taking more now because that's what's there.
I think that there's been certain teams in the past, many teams in the past at the University of North Carolina, since I've been watching them since, good gosh, Mike O'Corin, I guess, going back that far. There's been a lot of teams that Caleb Love would have played on. He would have been outstanding. And I think would have been a fan favorite. And he would have fit in great on some. And like you say, he's on one of the more plotting teams now, or one of the more plotting styles. I know from my experiences, when you coach athletes who are really just tremendous talents and put them in that type of style, it's like a shock to their system, and it's something that they just hate. The worst thing you could do, I mean, if you imagine, if you're Bill Self or Scott Drew or somebody like that, because I really enjoy watching teams like Baylor and Kansas, with the way that they play and the freedom that they play with and how hard they play defensively. But if Bill Self or Scott Drew come in tomorrow and say, all right, we're junking the system, we're running Princeton offense for the rest of the season, they'd have a revolt. And I mean, they would. Guys, athletic guys don't want to play that stuff. And Caleb's kind of not that, but North Carolina's not running Princeton, but what's Princeton offense most of the time? You go back and watch what Tony Bennett. Is there a big difference? Now, I'm just talking about style. I'm not talking about all the movement and all that stuff right now. Is there a big difference right now in what Hubert Davis is doing and what Tony Bennett's doing just in playing style and flow and things like that? There's not. It's going to get down to the final 5 or 10 seconds of the shot clock. It's going to be half-court games trying to get the ball inside.
I think the difference is UVA passes up multiple okay shots to get the better shot, which is their mission. I think Carolina will often use a whole shot clock and not pass up a good shot because there's nothing available until.
Well, for what it's worth, I'll say that I would really go through a root canal and watch Virginia play basketball. That's a whole nother.
Well, you may have to watch Virginia and North Carolina on Thursday, my friend, on a neutral court in Greensboro. So that's why I'm thinking, 53-45 and Carolina's done, right? They may not score 50 the way that they're playing at times offensively. They're not hitting shots. And that's the other thing about the not hitting shots thing. I'm a big believer that, and I said this earlier, and I don't remember if you commented too much on it, but it's not just a matter of the ball going to the basket. People just look at shooting and think all shooting's the same, or it should always be the same. It's such an important factor in how you get those shots. Yeah. And how a guy receives the ball to shoot, because it's bang, bang. And if you get rhythm shots, you're going to make more of them. And I think, and that's why I went back to Clemson, Virginia, and even Florida State. I thought they were very flawed against Florida State in a lot of ways. Plus letting them back in the game, which I thought they lost some of their mental toughness when that happened. But the threes they got were rhythm threes. And that's it. If they're not getting that, they just have such a terrible time offensively. And it's so obvious. It was obvious early on last night they weren't going to get those threes. Because Duke's like, we know what you're going to do, and we're going to stop it. So, play out of character. We dare you to play out of character, and they never did. They didn't change anything.
Yeah, Duke, we were talking about before we come on, Duke, where I was impressed with the way they guard on the perimeter, and it looked like some of the Duke teams in the past, maybe not the greatest Duke teams I've ever seen, that as far as defensive go, and they've had some really good ones, but it reminded me some of that last night where, they just don't give you, they're up in you, and it's not a deal, okay, we're going to play 8 feet off of you and not let you, and not let you drive by us. It wasn't that. It's like, hey, we're going to get up in you, and we're going to contest. We're still not going to get by us. We're going to get low. We're going to chop our feet. So, Duke did all that. And, so you're talking about North Carolina offense has really struggled trying to generate something against a Duke defense is not bad at all.
Yeah, Duke played defense for 40 minutes last night. Every possession. It was pretty impressive. So staying on defense now, what do you like that you've seen from Carolina's defense? Don't go to the negatives. Just tell me what you like that you've seen. Maybe an example of some evolution defensively for them in the half court, because they have clearly junked the trapping stuff unless they're behind and trying to come back. They don't flash anything different during the course of the game. So what have you liked that you've seen from them defensively?
I thought they made Duke earn buckets last night. I really do. You know, in watching the game, here's the big advantage Duke has this year over North Carolina. So North Carolina wants to get the ball inside. And Baycott, let's face it, Baycott, it's just really big for North Carolina that Baycott scores against good teams. Well, Duke's got Derek Lively. And he had 9 block shots, I think, the first time that they played. Yeah, and to me, he's 7'4" wingspan. I've watched him in person multiple times. Runs like a deer from baseline to baseline. Trust me, I've watched him a lot in person. From baseline to baseline, there wasn't a guard in American high school faster than him baseline to baseline. He could run with any guard in the country. If you ran half court, he could swat it at the rim. If he ran a guard down from 94 feet, put it up against the wall, he could do that too. So you've got his lengths. You've got Baycott trying to shoot over that stuff. So last night, Lively played 5 minutes first half. Foul trouble. And I really felt like North Carolina missed a golden opportunity there with Lively in foul trouble to really not punish them offensively with him out. Now, flipping over to the other side of the ball, North Carolina doesn't have that rim protector like Lively. So they're not going to have guys. Baycott can alter some shots, but it's not close on that part. So they're going to go what they do. They go over a lot of ball screens, and they drop coverage, and they've got pretty good at that. And they're pretty good at trailing that from behind when that guard turns the corner and gets up. And teams have a hard time, in my opinion, getting clean looks off that. And they do a good job of shielding the bucket. You know, Leaky Black obviously is a tremendous defender. Pete Nance does some good – Pete Nance can block shots. And Pete Nance, obviously – what's one thing I liked about him, you know, he could play the 5, but he could also step on the floor a little bit. The only problem I have with Nance, he gaps his stance too much. He opens up and gives them a lane to either one side or the other. Usually it's a baseline side. I like to see him more squared up. But that's the one big thing that I've seen. I think they wall it off well. And but now, if you've got – the thing I see, if you've got a guard spread the floor and go one-on-one like North Carolina State did, and I was really worried about that game going into Raleigh. I was worried about it at Chapel Hill. I think they have – and I've said this. I think they play well team-wise. I think they have trouble one-on-one keeping the ball in front of them.
Well,
so
look at the 3 teams. Let me jump in real fast. The 3 teams that play like that, the 3 teams that will do that and force you to guard all over the place, Miami, Pittsburgh, and NC State. And Carolina's record against those 3 teams is, 1-4. And so, yeah, I agree with you on that. I want to ask you specifically. I agree with what you're saying.
Let me say this.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
That's why I think they can beat Virginia. Okay, number one, Virginia can't score, and let's just get that.
And Virginia's not as good defensively as it has been in the past.
No, and they don't put fear of God in you with their offense. Yeah. So if you watch them, their guards are not going to spread you out, and they're not going to. That's where North Carolina gets hurt. It's what Pitt did. It's what Miami did. It's what North Carolina State did. Yeah. That's what those teams do. I mean, Pitt made a living with their 2 guards. I mean, just one day. I think their leading score had 31 both times. And couldn't keep them in front. So Virginia can't do that. Well, what's Virginia's thing? Get it inside, go into the block, play inside out. Well, North Carolina's better on the block than Virginia is. So I
Virginia's been better offensively this year when their 5, being Vanderplas, is stepping out and shooting threes from the top of the key and stuff, because they're doing a lot more the handoffs and things like that. They've gotten slower off. It's weird. They played him because they wanted more offense, a little bit more bounce than Shedrick, and they're not as good offensively as they were, gosh, in December and early January. So you're right. I do think that but going back to the Tar Heels, I want to ask you something specifically about one of the things they do, and I watch it a lot, and the 3 of us who travel and cover there's 3 outlets, and 3 of us that do that, we talk a lot about their defensive stuff early in games. And I talk with Caleb. I end up talking to him about this a lot for some reason, but they're switching. And they had, for a while, certainly in the first half at Notre Dame, their switching was terrible. Like, the ball would be in the wing, and let's say Goodwin would pass the ball 8 feet to Cormac Ryan, and they would switch, and they're not putting pressure on them to do anything. There'd be no reason to switch, but they were doing it because they're told to switch. And they were very soft switches. And then the second half, they were so much better at it. And I asked Caleb, what was the difference? He said, we were more definitive. We communicated the switch, so we were switching more precisely at the right time. We were definitive when we did it. And I've actually seen them like that since then. The shooting is what it is, but they haven't lost games for a while. I think certainly since then. They didn't lose Saturday night because of defense. Florida State didn't get back in the game because defense was terrible. The offense just didn't score for a while. And Virginia, I thought they did a really nice job defensively against them. They have been better at switching, but I think they switch too much. They get into a lot of situations where guards are on bigs, and it is amazing how often teams don't see it. Some of the offenses in the ACC, the recognition's so poor that you got RJ Davis on a big. You need to see that, recognize it, and dump it down there and go right at him. And teams don't do that a whole lot. Notre Dame had it. Leszewski had a guard on him 12 times, and he got 1 shot out of it, which is incredible. So they've gotten away with it sometimes, but I do think the over switching is an issue, and it's the kind of thing that I think teams should exploit more, but they haven't been. But other than that, though, David, I do think that they're doing some nice things, and sometimes those switches have helped. Sometimes the switches have fouled up sets when teams are running sets, and they have to go in a little bit of freelance of their own and take some bad shots. I thought that happened with Duke sometimes.
The best thing you could do against sets, switching pressure. I mean, that's the best thing. And you were talking about, the switches, soft switches. And I know from teams I've coached, that's a big issue when you switch. And that is the guy that's getting ready to switch onto the ball a lot of the times will be 7 or 8 feet off of it. When the guy comes off the screen, go switch, and the guy doesn't show on the ball. He's relaxing away from it. Communication could be poor. There could be no communication. Help's not in the right place. So what you've got to do to be a good switching team, you've got to communicate first. But to be able to do that, you've got to look and watch everything. You've got to anticipate what's going to come, and you've got to be proactive. I mean, when that switch comes, the best teams you'll see when they switch, it's like turning a rabid dog loose on the ball when that next guy comes. And that's what the teams do. That's what Duke was really good at last night.
Yep.
And so I think the more you do that, you'll get better, because if you learn from your mistakes, now if you're content, just lazy, then the same things are going to keep happening. I think that's what happens more times than not. Switch is just laziness. But I think overall, if you take pride in it, the more you do it, you'll understand why you gave up big plays, and you'll understand what you have to do, to correct that. So, that's something that they've got better at. But this is a team right now that can switch 1 through 3. Now, you don't want to get RJ. There's a side. They're not positionless. So, like you say, you can catch RJ Davis on a bigger play. If RJ and Leaky switch, RJ might end up on a 6'8" guy. So, that's not something that you want. So, you've got to be careful there. Obviously, you don't want Armando Bacot out switching ball screen. That's why they do it.
But they do that, though.
Soft drop. Nance, it's hit and miss, of who he can guard on the perimeter. There's some guys out there he can guard. So you've got to be selective. And so then you've got to have your head in the game, have a high basketball IQ, communicate.
Well, Hubert loves to talk about how like Armando and Pete can guard 1 through 5, and they were doing that a lot before. Am I correct in saying they've been doing more drop coverage the last couple of weeks?
Yeah. Armando, you don't want, I mean, look, anybody that's listening to this show and watching it, so do you want Armando Bacot switching out on Jeremy Roach? Yeah, I think our friends at home can answer that question. He does it. So that the drop coverage is more, is more conducive. And it is what it is. With a big, that's tough. Not knocking it all, but the drop coverage, like I said, I feel like they've done well with that. I think it matches their personnel.
The eye test is important in this conversation because neither one of us are on the selection committee. Neither one of us have created the formula that gives the world this horrific thing called the NET or the net, whatever people. I call it NET because it's consistent with RPI, which is the world I lived in for a while. A lot of people just call it the net. Whatever the case is, it's a foolish model to use because it determines a narrative on everybody by Christmas, and then you're stuck in it. You can't really climb out of it or you can't fall out of it. So the eye test question is, how often have you watched North Carolina this year where you've thought to yourself, they're an NCAA tournament team?
Played good against Virginia. And I'm trying to think pre-ACC. Gosh, I got to go back and think about who they played.
Just generally
I
speaking.
North Carolina State at home, and correct me, there may be some games I'm missing out on. North Carolina
Ohio State, Madison Square Garden's one. Virginia
at home. I can think of like two. To me, that was by far their two best ACC games.
Clemson at home. I'll go Ohio State, Madison Square Garden. I'll go at Virginia without Armando or Pete Nance, and they had the lead.
You look at where Ohio State's trended now.
At that time, they were pretty good. But didn't Zed Key get hurt, though, and that sort of threw them off the rails a little bit?
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes, you'll hear that and they'll say, well, when we played them back in December, they were pretty good, but now, they're totally 6-20. And I'm not thinking, well, were they?
Well, I think that's maybe
the one thing. Let me say that.
I think that highlights my question a little bit. I went to Ohio State so quickly.
Let me say this like on Ken Palm. I'll give you an example. Because I live close to Nashville, and I've got some Vanderbilt friends. And Vanderbilt's got the best record in the SEC, tied for it in the last 10 games, believe it or not, 8-2. Jerry Stackhouse, we're North Carolina. Jerry Stackhouse, I watch a lot of Vanderbilt. Jerry Stackhouse has done a tremendous job. Now, so they're 8-2 the last 10. So you look at them. They've beaten Kentucky. They've beaten Arkansas, Mississippi State, Tennessee. They've beaten a bunch of teams. They got a bunch of quad one wins. They got a bunch of quad one wins in the SEC. Now that 8 out of 8-2, 8 out of 10, that's against SEC. So they're like 11-7 in the SEC, which is a good league. They're like the next 4 out. They're right there with North Carolina in it. So if you look at quad one wins, it's not even close. But here's the thing. You look at Ken Palm, they start out Vanderbilt like number 115 in Ken Palm. And I'm like, how can you do power ratings and all that stuff and start a team out at 115? They couldn't play good enough to play their way off of that. They hadn't even played a game yet. So I feel like there's some built-in biases on all this stuff. And they've always got their way to explain it out of it. I thought Texas A&M last year was a good point, Ben. And there's going to be somebody this year. And Jay Billis, he'll be a figurehead for the NCAA, and he'll say, hey, there's 64, who cares, and all that stuff. But it does matter. And North Carolina is in the midst of that thing right now. Ask North Carolina fans if it matters or not, whether they're in the tournament. It may be Dayton if they get in, and that's fine, but you want them to get there.
Didn't UCLA start in Dayton get to the Final Four here a couple of years ago?
Sure did.
Yeah. VCU got to the Final Four starting in Dayton.
Syracuse seems like every time Syracuse made a Sweet 16 run, they were in Dayton.
I do think, though, this is a different group. I think Dayton, I don't know, maybe it would take the pressure off these kids. I think the weight was lifted a couple of weeks ago, but to answer the question, let me state the question again. I think you gave your answer, but you weren't direct.
Okay.
Generally speaking, does this team pass the eye test for an NCAA tournament team?
No, not at all. I think the eye test is worse than that. And I'll say this. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention another podcast here, but I was watching, like I said, as I'm watching podcasts at night, doing things. I've watched all of the Tar Heel Illustrateds. And so I'm watching those. I'm watching the Hubert Davis post conference, press conference on Tar Heel Illustrated. And another one I watched kind of away from it was Field 68, Jeff Goodman, Rob Doster, and those guys. Yeah. So Jeff Goodman's on there and he's talking about how hard it is to watch North Carolina play. And I'm looking down, I'm saying, is he tapped my phone or something? If I text something and he's read it, because he's saying everything that I've been saying about him. And you just don't see it when you're watching. If I'm Joe the plumber from Pennsylvania or Ohio or wherever that guy was from back in the day, and I'm watching North Carolina and I don't have a dog in the fight, there's nothing there watching North Carolina that makes me want to keep watching them, where I'm saying, man, if they get in the tournament, everybody better look out. And there's always some of those teams, and I don't see it with their playing intensity. There's nothing about their offense that tells me that. Their defense doesn't tell me that. They're, like I say, they're not playing with that chip on their shoulder. There's just nothing there. And if you look at their last couple of wins, even on that winning streak, the win Florida State, Notre Dame, it sure didn't tell me that.
So what you're saying is a team that's not all that physical, doesn't embrace physical play, doesn't initiate a whole lot of physical play, but plays a lot of games that people describe as a rock fight, is actually a bad thing. Because a rock fight should be old Big East, occasional Big Ten, and some of the ACC games. Like some of the Carolina Duke games have been rock fights in the past. Maryland used to do that. I think Louisville at times, when they've been really big, has been a rock fight team. But when you're in a rock fight game and you're not that physical, you don't embrace, you don't receive it very well. And I'll give you an example of that, statistical example in a second. You don't initiate it very well. That's a bad sign. And let me give you the statistical example. I'm glad I'm going to be able to sneak this in. In the last 3 games, and mind you, 2 of them they won. 2 of them were games in which they actually moved fairly well. They're 13 for 36 on layups, and they've missed 2 dunks.
Yeah.
And what I said about the Duke game, Hubert was asked afterward about all the chippies they missed. And I said at the Duke game, I said, I'm not sure they were really chippies. To me, a chippy is sort of an uncontested shot at the rim that you just don't convert. When it's contested and you don't play well through that defense, through that defender, and you don't handle the contact, play through contact, then it becomes a contested shot. And so many of those layups missed, 6 for 18 against Duke. Those are contested shots when they should. You saw what Filipowski did on one of the putbacks. He went up and just rammed that sucker home. Carolina's trying to tip it in and trying to float it in and shoot it to the rim, have a soft roll and have it go in. They're not flushing in traffic. They're not playing through the physicality much. So that's what this team is. 13 for 36 on layups in the last 3 games. That kind of tells you that they're not really rock fights, David. It's kind of just ugly basketball, right?
Well, and when we're saying rock fights, the only reason you say rock fights is because they're a good rebounding team. They're one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the country. Yep. And got Baycott inside. So that's why I would say, I think you would look at them and people would say, well, they've got that physical makeup. But like you say, they're not, because if you watch a lot of basketball, which I do, and you see some of these games that are just, man, they're intense. And they don't even have to have these big space eaters inside. you just got strong, athletic kids out there just, I mean, getting after it. And I guess that would be the phrase I would use. Do you ever watch North Carolina and say, man, on both ends of the floor, they are just getting after it? I mean, they're diving over scores tables, they're going through walls, they're nobody's safe. And you never feel that way. So, and I would ask you, like I said, if you don't have a dog in the fight, you're a basketball fan, you like to watch it, you live in New Mexico somewhere, is there anything about watching North Carolina that would make you say, hey, I can't turn the channel, I've got to watch them? Yeah, I don't think you could say that.
Yeah, I think the royalty factor of who they are,
Right.
especially when they're on the road and they're wearing the blue uniforms and there's venom in the stands toward them. I think that could be interesting, but not if they're shooting 24% and they have no assists in the first half like they did at Notre Dame. No assists in the first half. No assists and 8 turnovers. That's that's almost unthinkable. And I guess it was for 44 years, because the last time they had a half that bad was 1979. So, for me, I'll answer the question. I don't think they passed the eye test.
Now,
and I think they need to win. I think they need to win the ACC tournament to get in. I think the league is in trouble this year, and I think the league is in trouble in a lot of ways moving forward. It's a different topic for a different day. I think the committee is going to punish the league. I think right now, when you see a team like Pittsburgh, who was in first place a week ago on the 10 line, that means you got to win a game in Greensboro. When you see Clemson, who has a bye, a double bye, they don't play till Thursday. They're in the second 4 out, the next 4 out, or whatever it is, first 4 out, second 4 out. That's a problem. You see NC State, a team that has been really impressive at times this year, and clobbered some people, and a club that I think caused some trouble in the NCAA tournament, but they lose a couple of games in the league, and there they are in the 10 line as a 10 seed. I think that North Carolina has to scale those teams, and all of those clubs have looked like an NCAA team a lot more often than the Tar Heels have, which tells me they have to win the entire thing in Greensboro to get into the NCAA tournament.
Here's the thing. To me, there are 3 teams, and we've already mentioned the 3 teams that they don't match up well against. And I could actually throw Wake Forest in the way they play, the way they spread the floor out. But the ones I'm thinking about are Miami, Duke's a 4 seed, Pitt's a 5 seed. So I think about them. They're all on the other side of the bracket. So, when I look at North Carolina's side, they have beaten everybody on their side. So Boston College plays Louisville. Obviously, North Carolina gets the winner of that. And you would think, I would think North Carolina would be favored in that game. Then you get Virginia Tech and Notre Dame. The winner plays North Carolina State. That team plays Clemson. You look, they've beaten those teams. They would get Virginia in the quarterfinal round. Now, you're talking about winning 4 games. That's a long way to get through. But I do think, look, and I think it's an indictment of the ACC. I really do, because the ACC has dropped dramatically from what it was. But I think it's an indictment there. I can see if North Carolina got to the championship game, it would not surprise me a bit. Because, like I said, now, if they were on that side and they had Duke to play Duke in quarterfinals, they had to play Miami in quarterfinals, I'd say, man, it's tough. Been a good year. See you next year. But I just look at that. I think they can beat Virginia. I think whoever comes to that Clemson, North Carolina State game on the other side, I think they can beat them. So I think the side of the bracket they're on matches up well. Here's the question. Is there enough there? Let's say they do. Is there enough there to get them in the tournament? Because I don't think any of those teams, even Virginia, I just don't think it resonates. I just don't think it does enough. And that's where the league hurts. And if I can say this right quick,
I
tell this to people all the time. I said, you need to pull for people in your own league.
Yes.
If you're North Carolina, you need to pull for Duke, and you need to pull for North Carolina. As painful as it is, now that'll get you whipped. Saying it. If I'm the ACC, I need to tell Tennessee fans, hey, you need to pull for Kentucky, and you need to pull for Florida, and if you're Baylor, you need to pull for Texas, and you need to pull for Oklahoma and Kansas and all that. And people don't want to do it, but here is real life. Okay.
Yeah.
Your conference, the power of your conference matters. Look, the Big 12 may get everybody. They're talking about North Texas Tech being a bubble team, and they're like, what, 4-10 or something like that in the league? And the Big 10 gets all those teams in. And I remember a couple of years ago, Kentucky won the SEC 15-3. The SEC was really down that year. The SEC was where ACC is right now. They were 15-3. It would have been 4 years ago. They won the SEC. They were ranked 33rd in Ken Palm, and they were like 26-5 because the league was so bad. I was doing work for Minnesota at that time before I came to work for you. Minnesota Vanderbilt. Minnesota was 15-15 and or 14-14, so they were 500. They were ranked 19th because of the Big Ten. You go look at Ken Palm, and you just kenpalm.com. You'll pull up to the front page and look at the records and look where they're ranked. Look where the Big Ten teams are ranked. Look where the Big 12 teams are ranked. Look at their record and look where they're ranked, and you'll be amazed. So when you're in a conference that doesn't have that reputation and it's down, you can't win enough games to play your way out if you're buried down. You just can't jump. Yeah. So
I think
that's killer.
You make a good point about their side of the bracket. They have 3 losses combined against the teams on their side of the bracket. 2 of them, they didn't have Armando. Mm-hmm. But here's the way I look at it. Virginia managed to stay number 30 after playing Louisville. I was surprised. I thought they were going to drop. There must have been some other stuff that happened that kept them up there. So Virginia remains a quad 1 win and will and should certainly until the Wahoos play again. But here's the problem. Let's say Carolina gets BC. They beat BC. Then they play Virginia. If they beat Virginia, their home win over Virginia will no longer be a quad 1 game because Virginia will drop. But the neutral site game becomes a quad 1 game because they're in the top 50 and will stay one. So they're basically swapping one quad 1 for another against the same team. That takes them to Friday night. Let's say they get Clemson. Clemson wins Thursday. They're not going to be top 50 by Friday night and certainly afterwards. So if Carolina beats Clemson in that game, that won't be a quad 1 win because they won't be in the top 50. So then they have to get to Saturday night, and they'll likely play a quad 1 game Saturday night, which means what? They have to win the game. So they have to cut down the nets. To me, there is no scenario where they're really going to pad themselves without winning a game Saturday night against somebody, whoever comes out of the other side of the bracket, and that means winning the title and cutting down the nets. I think the only way they get in is to win the ACC tournament. The only way.
Yeah, and you may be right. And I just think they're in a hole right now because, like, I think the quad 1 wins are going to be big, and
they need Michigan. They need Michigan to do some damage. They need Ohio State. We're as bad as Ohio State's been. They were 58 coming into this weekend. They got help by their win over Maryland the other night. If they win a couple and Michigan wins one in the Big Ten tournament, they both might be top 50, and then they can get 2 more quad 1 wins. But they're not going to be respected quad 1 wins.
According to Joe Lenardi, though, Michigan's won the competition. They're ones that's trying on their own side of the bubble that's trying to get in too. So there you talk about the catch-22 of beating a team that knocks them out of quad 1. Another one is Michigan. You're hoping Michigan wins games to help you, but then they're working against you because they're trying to get in too.
Exactly. Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You've got a mess, and eventually, losses matter. And that's another thing. You lose games. You just keep losing them, and you're like, okay, we're going to try to get it right. And then your wiggle room just gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
That's what's going to hurt Clemson. They have 2 quad 4 losses.
You got double-digit losses. You got no quad 1 wins. You're in your weak conference. You can't get good wins. So, that makes it tough. And that's why you get, like I say, that's why you got Texas Tech and teams like that on the bubble that, I used to think that teams weren't allowed into the big dance unless they had a 500 record at least in their league. And I think that used to be a thing. But I think since they went to
Virginia, the year after Ralph Sampson in 1984, Virginia was 6-8 in the ACC, and they got to the Final Four. And they lost by 2 to Houston, and Houston ended up playing Georgetown in the finals. Virginia was a bucket and a free throw away from being 6-8 in the ACC and playing for the national title. But that's when the ACC was just ridiculously good back then. And by the way, their coach was Terry Holland, who just passed away last week, one of the great gentlemen and ambassadors of ACC basketball, and a really, really good coach. He took over a program that was garbage for a long time, and he put them on the national scene, and they were very good after Ralph too. It wasn't just Ralph. He got to a regional final a couple years after Ralph, 2 regional finals without Ralph. So he was a pretty good coach.
Yeah, I think Dale Brown on one of his teams back in the 80s when he had Ricky Blanton and all those guys, if I'm not mistaken, was 500 in the ACC that year and got to the Final Four, or in the SEC.
Yeah. They were the first double-digit seed to get to a Final Four. They did in 86 when it was in Dallas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was they played Louisville in the Final Four, and Louisville won it that year with Never Nervous Promise.
Yeah. Dale Brown went through the whole tournament, with a thing where he wasn't going to sleep because they had played 4 games, so he didn't sleep from Wednesday to Sunday night. And so Dale was.
God, I would love to have covered him.
He was a he got in a fight basically with everybody in the league. We used to go to coaching clinics, and they were great back in the day. Dale Brown would do it, and Wimp Sanderson hated Dale Brown. I mean, they hated each other with passion. So I forget where it was at, maybe in Tunica or somewhere, but they were doing the same clinic. So Wimp's back in the crowd, he's standing up against a wall, and I was probably about 5 or 10 feet from him, and Dale Brown's up there giving his spiel on the freak defense or whatever, and Wimp's just there shaking his head over there. He'd go, "That's a damn lie. That's a damn lie. That's all you heard, though." I mean, just shake his head and say it out loud. It was the best.
Again, this has nothing to do with North Carolina, but I'll ask you anyway. Who had a better scowl, Wimp Sanderson or Norm Stewart?
Oh, Wimp had the all-time worst. Hold on, I got a dog coming through.
That's all right. Wimp always looked like he was wronged as you can be, man. It was the Plaid Players at Alabama. I remember that. The band used to wear the plaid. They call themselves the Plaid Players because he wore that plaid blazer. All right, David. So what do you think the Tar Heels do in Greensboro? We'll close out with that. How many do you think they win?
Okay, I'm looking right here. I think they beat Boston College. I think they beat Virginia. I think North Carolina State beats Clemson. Then you've got North Carolina State.
On a Friday night in Greensboro.
I think and that's a third game in 3 nights. But that would be the third game in 3 nights for North Carolina State, too. So North Carolina State over either Virginia Tech or Notre Dame. I think North Carolina gets at least to the semis. And like I said, I think they match up well on that side. Now, I think when they run into that other, I'm going to say this. Like I said, I would think if they would have gotten, they are a 7 seed. If they would have gotten an 8 seed and played Wake Forest, and then the winner gets Miami, and the top one, I think they're out in a hurry.
What a huge difference.
I'm not having some type of, midlife crisis here where all of a sudden I think North Carolina is this great team by saying I'm just going back and I'm just everything I've said, I'm just, throwing it out, contradicting myself. I just think it's the draw. I think draws are huge, and I think they're on a good side. So, I could see them going that far, but I don't think they could knock. And when does fatigue become an issue? Baycott's a big guy. So you ask him to play.
And Hubert doesn't play the bench.
4 nights in a row. And here's the thing, too. Let me say this. And that's the issue we've talked about. R.J. Davis, Caleb Love, Leaky Black, Armando Baycott, they log a lot of minutes. They log a lot of minutes, and they have all year. And I think you brought it up maybe a little bit. And I thought Jay Billis brought it up last night a little bit. Maybe they were getting tired on some things later in the game. So when does all that depth, when does playing 38, 39 minutes in the game or whatever you're playing, when does that start kicking in? And so there's a lot to take there. I'll just put it this way. I like the side of the bracket they're on.
Their biggest defensive breakdowns occurred in the last 5 minutes of the game last night, I think, because they were tired. I thought another RJ was spent. There's no doubt about it. I agree with you. I'll tell you what, Friday night, North Carolina, NC State, and then Duke, Miami is pretty cool semifinal for a league that's had a bad year. That's a pretty cool semifinal. The building will be a buzz. And, man, I would love for the Duke Miami game to be first so I could actually see it. I think your tournament champion comes out of the Duke Miami winner. And, boy, Duke's playing well, but I'm probably going to pick Miami to win this tournament. I just love watching that team play. I think they can do a lot of damage in the big tournament.
Remember, I put you on them last year. I was talking about January.
Yeah, you were.
And they went to 8. I keep looking for some teams that I see some of that in that maybe nobody's kind of looking for.
I think they're one of them.
I thought Miami's just got that look because, man, they're guard and maybe a little bit different in the post, but they're so,
I didn't think
I said they could Pitt might be that. They're not as deep, but like you said, they just had that.
The difference between Pitt and Miami is you have to guard the 5 everywhere at Miami, Norchad O'Meara. You don't have to guard Federico a whole lot at Pitt. I think that's the difference. And I think there's a little more bounce with Miami than Pitt. Pitt's a little more physical with what they do. Miami's a little springier, and they can be physical. I said 2 months ago that I didn't think Miami would sustain it that much because of the inside. I was wrong. I also thought a couple of times I thought North Carolina was turning the corner, and I was wrong about that too. So that's been a really, I've missed a little bit on those. I never thought North Carolina was headed toward cutting down the nets in Houston because they never gave me that sign. I don't think they're going to cut down the nets in Greensboro either, David. I think that they're going to lose probably, I think Thursday. I think they play really well Wednesday and win, get it out of their system, and then they can't shoot Thursday against Virginia, and that's where they lose probably.
I can see that because, look, it's not – that Virginia game is not going to be a blowout. First one to 50 may win. And so that kind of game tells you it's competitive. And when it's competitive, both of them have a shot. And I just – like I said, the same reason I'm telling you I don't like Virginia. I think they can beat Virginia. North Carolina has those same problems.
Yeah, I agree with you about Virginia. I think at times earlier this year, Virginia looked pretty good offensively, but they've hit the skids and they haven't found their groove again now. And if you haven't been good offensively for 6 weeks, you don't usually find it in the NCAA tournament. So I think Virginia maybe Sweet 16 at best, probably. So we'll maybe next week. Well, I don't know if we'll talk about the tournament next week because we're going to be so swamped. But it all depends on what happens with Carolina, how swamped I am. So. I'm not convinced that they're going to get through, and I also am not convinced they're going to take an NIT bid. I'll go on record saying that my projection is the season ends later this week, and they don't play in the NIT, and that's it.
Well, how hot's the seat get? Yeah, I know you're 2 years in.
Not hot, but warm. Not hot, but warm.
But I know it's coming off the Final Four. I wouldn't think it would be hot yet, but I think people would want to start seeing some results, You can't continue. I guess a better question. I take that question back. It's probably not a good one. Hot's this far, but how long could that sustain itself? Where, you're having subpar seasons. How many of those can you have?
Well, here's the thing, and this is going to come across as pretty heavy criticism, but my job's to observe and say what I see and write what I see. The reality is that Hubert Davis has been the head coach for 9 months in season. And we're in the 10th month right now. November, December, January, February, March. 9 months in season, and he's had one good month. They've been just wobbly, trying to find themselves the other 8 months. So that's part of the evaluation too. Getting to a champion. It's amazing to me that this club had a 15-point lead at halftime in the national title game. I mean, think about it. Caleb misses a three at the top of the key. They had Justin McCoy's a screener because Armando's out. Maybe if Armando doesn't turn the ankle, he sets the screen, and maybe Caleb hits that shot and it goes to overtime. I mean, who knows? I mean, ifs don't really matter too much in sports because they didn't happen, but they still had a 15-point lead at the half of the national title game, and that's the only good month they've had. They've had good moments and good periods, but not good months. I thought they were okay in January this year, but they beat a lot of teams that really weren't much. So it was really hard to get a good gauge on who they were. So that's 8 out of 9. Not so good. And I think that's what Jeff Goodman may have alluded to, because I heard that podcast and I heard what he said. And sometimes Goodman kind of goes hard in certain directions to sort of generate some stuff. But I thought he was spot on with that in a lot of ways. I don't think he was wrong. And I think that that's part of the evaluation. So I do think that if they don't get in, the seat has to be warm a little bit because you're North Carolina. You're not Indiana State. You're North Carolina. So you have to strive to have a national title contender, I think, 3 out of 4 years. That's what you are. That's what your history says you are. So I also think next year could be a tough year depending on who comes back. They could have a lineup of guys that weren't getting consistent time off the bench this year with a couple of new ones, maybe one new player and a high school player, and maybe a couple of guys from the portal and see how it rolls. So I don't think that anybody can pencil down college basketball Hall of Fame for them yet. I don't think that that's on anybody's radar, and nobody in power is ready to make a change now. That's people that are saying that. We get it on our Twitter feed all the time. That's ludicrous. It's not going to happen. They're going to, if they win Wednesday, they win 20 games in a year after they played the national title. There isn't a program on the planet that fires your coach after that. Not even Kentucky.
Well, yeah, I agree. And like I said, I know how close you are to the program there. So I just, more than anything, wanted to ask you and see, what you felt about it. But like I said, saying hot seat was probably, like I said, on my part, it's probably why I should have that way. But like I said, the question is, how long could underachieving be sustainable at North Carolina? And so, until.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. The people in power would love for it to work with Hubert, because if you can have a man of his character and the other elements of the program that he is instilled and that he makes a regular part of who they are, if you can maintain that and also win at a North Carolina clip, then he's the guy that they all want. Nobody there. You don't find anybody say a negative word about him as a man. Or how he deals with people. It's not a Matt Doherty situation at all. Matt Doherty's, and Matt, I don't know how much he admits these things now, but that was a very difficult time that Matt made very difficult. That was unnecessary. A lot of that stuff wasn't necessary. Losing's tough, but some of the other things, that was really unfortunate. Hubert's not that guy. Those things aren't happening right now. They just aren't playing up to the standard. And it's not just that we in the media said it. They said it. They said championship or bust multiple times. I asked Hubert in October at the ACC tip-off, are you okay with your team saying championship or bust? His answer was yes, but I'm not going to say it. So he was okay with it. They said it, so they have to be judged accordingly. They did the Sports Illustrated cover thing, the remake of 40 years ago when Dean and some of his returning starters from the 81 team that played for the title sans Michael because he wasn't on the 81 team, when they did the similar thing. They did it. They said these things. He was okay with them saying it. So that means he's part of it. So they're going to get highly criticized. That's going to turn up the heat some, but this is not a Doherty situation at all.
Yeah. And, who knows? Maybe it's a moot point. Maybe they have a great week, when they get in, and we'll go back and erase this conversation from YouTube here in about.
Well, I mean, it is what it is at this point. If they do, the thing about it is a lot of people say, well, shoot, they can make that run. I wrote a column after Duke last night saying I'm not so sure that switch is there. People have been waiting for him to flip the switch, but if there's no switch on the wall, there's no switch to flip. And I just don't think it's there with this group. That's why I think they play well one game. Maybe I think BC can make it uncomfortable for him, especially if Quentin Post plays. I know he's banged up. And then they're going to have to shoot well and be offensive a second straight time against UVA. I'm just not sure that's going to happen.
Well, we'll see this weekend. ACC
All
tournament.
right.
Best time of the year.
Absolutely. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. We thank you so much for staying along for the longest podcast in THI history. David and I probably could have gone another hour and a half, but we're cool leaving it as is. If you like the show, go ahead and click like. Let your friends who are Carolina fans know that we exist. Subscribe so you get notifications when we upload. We do it often. And if you stayed and listened to this entire thing, let me know. Send us a DM. Our Twitter is @Heel Illustrated, not @Heels Illustrated, @Heel Illustrated. Send us a DM. Let me know you listen to this whole thing, and somebody will get a free 6-month subscription to Tar Heel Illustrated. How about that? So we'll chat, see how many of you guys stuck around for this thing. David, thank you so much. I enjoyed it as always, my friend.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me. I'll try to be more clean shaven next time.
You look good. You look better than me. I actually did shave. I've been growing a lot of stuff this year too, by the way. But I had to go to a memorial service on Saturday morning, so I had to go ahead and shave. My dad would not have been happy if I wasn't shaving. So
you won't know who this is. This is my Sami Zayn look. You won't know.
Well, it's your winter look, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you'll be shaving in here in about a month or so.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for stopping by.
My daughter gets married in May. I found out today this thing was coming off. I've got great marching orders.
When in May? We're still recording. When in May?
May the 4th.
I think that's when Jacob Turner gets married.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
Jacob's taking the plunge.
My daughter's not marrying Jacob, so we'll cut any of those rumors up.
That would have been a fun reception. All right, man. Till next time. Thanks for stopping by, everybody.